to Vietnam or the IRA. I mean, what makes it harder, in fact, is that this is not just a criticism of terrorism. Here we have to admit that the religion, Islam, is what underpins the problems we face. I mean, in Saudi Arabia, there's no democracy. Public executions and amputations are commonplace. Women are treated as second-class citizens. In Pakistan, the mullahs are still predominantly hardline and are locked in a virtual civil war with reformers. The contentious issue here is of course, the Islamic ordinances imposed upon the people by the military rulers in the late 70s, and it contains some despicable retributive punishments in the name of Allah. I mean, from stonings, lashes, amputations and beheadings. I mean, after many thwarted attempts at destruction by Al-Qaeda, we now know, if we didn't before, the severity of the threat. I mean, those who thought this was another IRA problem were behaving like fools on this. This is much worse. The footage in Pakistan recently, beyond the writ of President Musharraf in the northern area, I think it's called Waziristan, disclosing a graduation ceremony for over 300 confident suicide bombers, tells you all you need to know about the intent of these people. You know, Waziristan will soon become what Afghanistan has already become, a safe haven for terrorists. I mean, the two root fallacies are that terrorism is worse because of our resistance to it. No, people do not understand the enemy. Its form of Islamic fundamentalism has been steadily growing for many years. In a different sense, actually, I mean, even as far back as Thomas Jefferson had to fight Islamic fundamentalism in North Africa as far back as the late 18th century and early 19th century. I mean, the fundamentalists started first with Wahhabi and Salafi extremists who, with vicious acts of violence, were and are trying desperately to repress the factions of Islam which have departed from orthodoxy, and use that as a platform for repression, dispossession and cruelty. I mean, we talk of anti-imperialism, but we should recognise the squalid manoeuvre that underlies such a claim. I mean, this is not anti-imperialism. I'll give you an example, actually. Some of you may remember the Islamists blowing up the United Nations office in Baghdad in an attempt to kill Sergio Di Maio, one of the great international civil servants of our time, who had recently played a key role in the belated supervision of the independence of East Timor, Christian East Timor, from Indonesia, which is Muslim. The jihadists who murdered him put out a communique saying that his death was because he freed East Timor from Muslim oppression in Indonesia. I mean, this is what you have to do to keep them happy, not intervene when they're oppressing and killing. I mean, these are men who call for the restoration of the lost empire and the imposition of Sharia law on everyone within its borders. To not upset them, you have to sit back and watch them murder innocent people. This is the demands they make. I mean, one of the difficulties of taking a blithe approach to militant Islam is that there are numerous deracinated, uprooted Muslim men in Europe who think that the jihad aspect of Islam is the most important aspect, and that the inevitability of Islam's world domination involves activity from those with such a mindset. I mean, Islam is as fissile as it has ever been. It can be split that easily. We've paid insufficient attention to the pursuit of Al-Qaeda in Pakistan and Saudi Arabia, although our presence in Iraq did put an end to the reign of al-Zakari, of course, the Jordanian who was Al-Qaeda's top operative in Iraq. And I can tell you for now that you don't get to a position like that in Iraq without Saddam knowing about it and endorsing it. Winning the war on terrorism involves reaching out to very corrupt governments. The inhabitants need more education and economic investment and the eradication of some of the most brutal and oppressive governments in the world. I mean, the UN could have helped, actually. They substantially underestimated the number of troops needed to make the peace while efforts were made to construct a democratic Iraq. And a major factor in that was a failure to grasp the depth of animosity between the Sunnis who were dominant under Saddam, despite amounting to only 20% of the population, and the Shiites and Kurds. Perhaps the way in which the US forces removed the Ba'ath Party from administration could have been better. One can't dispute that, but it was necessary to have them removed if the militias on the side of the Sunnis and the Shiites were to be overcome. I mean, if the newly installed government is not up to the job of ending sectarian violence, then I don't see that more troops will be much help in the long run. It's essential straight away that a good government is and was put in place. The UN resolutions would have been redundant if it continued to ignore what Saddam was doing. To that extent, America played a part in discrediting it. I mean, Bush Senior, that is, his government, the message would have been sent to all rogue states that there was nothing stopping them acquiring nuclear weapons and terrorizing their own people. It could be argued that the reverse has happened, that American involvement in Iraq has militated against them intervening in other countries should an intervention become necessary. But that only goes to show the importance, I think, of having a strong UN that cannot be held to ransom by rogue states. I mean, if you look recently at the statement made by Sulaiman Abgaith, the Al-Qaeda terrorist, he says that all members of Al-Qaeda have the right to kill, I think he said 4 million American men, women and children because of their actions in the Middle East. I mean, we now know what needs to be done, and we know what we're up against if we didn't before. This is why this conflict is vitally important. It will mark the place of America, Britain, and the UN for many years to come. I mean, either they'll be seen as non-threatening, they'll be seen as forced to retreat in isolation, or they'll be guarantors of international freedom. It's imperative that a ubiquitous perception of the latter is echoed across the world. I mean, they've already got a terrible record, the UN, and proved very ineffectual in places like certainly Bosnia and Rwanda. I mean, those attacking both the indigenous folk and our troops in Iraq are doing so because they want to halt progress, good progress, which will help the inhabitants of Iraq. The battle between those who wish for a peaceful democratic society and those who wish to terrorize and commit murder cannot be understated and never should have been. If the US really were the hapless puppets of Israel, as some of the United Nations countries are claiming, I mean, Iran is where they would have gone first, because they're the ones that pose the biggest threat to Israel. You know, Israel was attacked to scupper the developing plans for any kind of peace deal between Israel and Hamas. You know, I mean, this kind of peace, I'm sorry to say, is anathema to most Islamic fundamentalists. I mean, we should be quite wrong if we think that this does not impact on our own country too. We have in this country many Muslims who want Sharia law introduced, many who support the jihadists, and many that support the oppression of women, too many who wish to incite violence, and of course those who are close to committing atrocities themselves. If you don't believe me, I mean, if you think I'm exaggerating, you only need to look at what's being preached in this country, in some of the most backward parts of our metropolitan cities, in some of the most awful mosques. I know, I've been to some of the places. The British government has been happy to neglect this problem, I feel. Certainly by not being aware of the real dangers. I mean, the same might be said of America and its complacency in failing to anticipate September the 11th. I mean, many of the Muslims in this country come from former British colonies, of course. I mean, so the relationship is probably tense to begin with. But we must have no patience with people who say that these people would not be so bad if it weren't for us meddling in their affairs. I mean, there are no doubt lots of Irish people or Cypriot people living in this country who have every right to be dismayed at British foreign policy as it's affected their two partition countries. But you know, they would not feel justified in bombing their neighbours under that pretext. I mean, the police have such a difficult job to do here in combating terrorism. I mean, intelligence must be reliable. I mean, good judgment is so important. It's so difficult too. I mean, if there are terrorist suspects and the police act too soon, then the evidence to prosecute could be lacking. If they arrive too late, then tens of people could be dead. I mean, maybe more. Certainly the terrorists want more deaths. the more the better for them. I mean, the hardest objective